The National Weather Service recently compiled its annual weather mortality data report for 2018, and this was, received in many media outlets uh, as something newsworthy because the heat death were the leading weather-related cause in 2018, but also over the recent 30-year average. And now you would think, oh yeah, this heat-related death are a major cause of death, and this is quite important in a warming world, right? So we can expect more of that. So this seems like a catastrophe in the near future for U.S. citizens, a major health threat. And without deeper knowledge, of course, you would have this view and perceive it as an alarming message. But what I found curious is that the weather mortality data report had only 134 dead people from heat in the United States in 2018. So, and this was inconsistent with what I knew about the data in existence in the literature and in analysis. So I want to just give the take of a 2015 paper, which I found solid, which is Gasparini et al., and which analyzed 74 million deaths from 13 countries, including the United States. And the summary finding stated in part, most of the temperature-related mortality burden was attributable to the contribution of cold. The effect of days of extreme temperature was substantially less than that attributable to milder but non-optimum weather. So it seems like the reverse message. Actually, cold is killing more people than heat, including in countries like the United States. And so it's not the extreme events like this super cold temperature or the super hot day in Texas that is killing a lot of people, but these, slightly, below normal or above normal weather events. So that's an important information that didn't get conveyed in the media reports about this report by the National Weather Service. And so the Gasparini et al. Findings were also consistent with other findings, generally saying that cold is, the bigger killer. It's more dangerous. And if you look at it in the very big picture, something, for example, in the moral case for fossil fuels, the overall death burden from these weather-related events has been plummeting for the last 100 years. And so it's less and less of a problem. And when you put this all into context, you would think, yeah, in a slightly warming world like we're experiencing now, the extremes are probably going to shift upwards into the more warmer thing. And, cold spells might be less of a problem in the United States overall. So the death burden overall, the relative risk, might actually decrease from extreme temperatures. And I found it curious that the media is jumping on this one report and never really explaining how this comes to pass. So the low death count number, it's probably what happened. And I haven't looked into the exact compilation of that, but probably what happened is they defined something like strictly attributable to, a certain heat event, like a heat stroke, dehydration, something like that, where you can actually get, sort of a death certificate explaining exactly, yeah, this is a cause of death. But when you look at actual mortality numbers, there's a wider range of things that happen, in cold or heat extreme weather events. And I think that's important to explain how these numbers relate and what's the context of this and what's the general relative risk. And, if you only have 134 dead people, like this is on the order of magnitude, like a lightning strike kills about 20 Americans each year, right? So this is, if you want to think about, will we have a more threatening environment in a warming future or less threatening environment, you would have to look at the bigger picture and put this in context and look at the most relevant things. And that's never done because there's sort of an unholy alliance between a media narrative that wants clickbait headlines, and and this kind of climate alarmism.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, so if the idea is supposed to be that like a few more people on net die from heat than cold, and therefore like that's justification for we just have to enact all these climate policies, like by the same logic, if this is really true about, heat and cold, then, well, if we valued human life, shouldn't we just round up everybody who lives in California and Nevada and Texas and ship them all, up to North Dakota? I mean, that would cost a whole hell of a lot less than what the Green New Deal policies advocate. And I mean, maybe you say, Watkins, you're not taking into account the people who would die from the forced relocation and all of the other effects. And my answer is exactly like you pointed out, Stefan. I mean, these numbers are actually meaningless because if we were really trying to do some calculus of like, is it better to be a little warmer, or a little colder, you couldn't just take these direct deaths from heat and cold. Like, you would want to know the full impact, and like changing weather affects people in all sort of ways. I mean, it affects people in terms of how often they go outside and whether they ride their bike or walk or take a car, the kinds of sports they play, the how much of natural gas they'll use to heat their homes, which can carry certain risks. I mean, there's just a million different things that change in all of these direct and indirect ways. And I would be skeptical that you could measure with any sort of precision or estimate with any sort of precision when we're talking, particularly when we're talking about numbers this small, which therefore means differences this small, like what the net effect is. And so the idea that we're going to figure out, okay, well, it's, net 100 lives that will lose if the weather changes, and therefore we're going to spend trillions to change the weather, like that is just a totally wrong way to think about things, especially because you also have to contrast that with all the people who would die as a result of the Green New Deal type policies, which nobody ever talks about. And so, I mean, big picture, I think what we want to know first and foremost, or what we do know first and foremost, is that to meet all of our needs, the fundamental things that we need are freedom and prosperity, including energy and technology. And then, like, once you figure out, like, all right, we will protect those at all costs because they enable us to cope with anything, almost any sort of threat, whether natural or man-made, then you can think about optimizing things, right? So if you have a situation where you're in a society that is progressing in terms of its wealth and technology, and it is a free society, then you can think, okay, well, maybe it becomes cheaper to use nuclear and carbon capture than to build a bunch of dams to deal with the influence of CO2, if we think that that is a real issue. But here, what is going on is that people are searching for grounds to restrict freedom and prosperity and say that they're bad things, and so they're not even pretending, or I mean, at least they're very rarely even pretending to do a real cost benefit calculus. It's just pointing out these kind of like pot shots and assuming we can't adapt to them, and assuming that, all right, well, clearly if you don't want people to die, then you have to accept our whole policy program.